Allison Avalos for WorkSpan TV. In today's episode of Research in Brief, we'll be discussing the Sales Compensation Programs and Practices Survey, recently released by World at Work. This is the 5th edition of this survey, and it includes information on sales roles, pay mix, performance measures, as well as a number of other elements of sales compensation. I'm joined today by Jim Steckman, Senior Sales Compensation Practice Leader for World at Work. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Allison.
Well, I think if you talk to most total rewards practitioners, they would say that there isn't a program or design element that hasn't been affected by the economy in the last couple of years. Before we get into the findings of this survey, can you talk about what's different about the sales compensation function in a tough economic environment versus general compensation?
For both general compensation and sales compensation, it's about the money. There's no question about that. I think the difference, though, in a tough economy where sales are flat or down or sharply down, as they have been at many organizations over the last several years, it has an impact on the general population, the general workforce, in terms of job security. For the sales force, it's both job security and income security they're worried about. That's because the sales force needs to make their numbers, needs to make the company's revenue numbers either reach target or exceed target in order for them to make their full income. A salesperson has got, on average, between 30 and 40%, and many times even much more than that, of their pay at risk based on making the numbers. So I think when you are in a difficult economic environment, the difference is that the sales force is very much concerned about their income security and feel at threat, either real or perceived, based on the difficult economic environment.
So we've established that sales compensation is definitely a unique beast, and I don't think that comes as a surprise to most who have worked in or around that field. What did we learn from the survey about the reasons for sales comp plan changes on an annual basis?
Well, we learned a couple of things. Fundamentally, getting the alignment right was by far the predominant driver behind changes to the plans, to companies that reported making plan changes this year. Alignment is always important, and by alignment I mean connecting the business strategy precisely with what the sales force is focusing on and how they're behaving. And alignment is always a cornerstone of a successful sales compensation plan, certainly. But honestly, over the last several years that we've done the survey, we saw a number of other drivers cited fairly prominently as well. Things like simplifying the plan, reducing plan complexity, adjusting measures and weights, rivaled getting the alignment right as a driver behind why the organization was making the plan change in the first place. This year, 8 of 10 respondents reported that getting the alignment right was their #1 driver behind making a change.
That's interesting. Conversely, though, the survey found that for the first time since 2005, the majority of companies are not adjusting their sales plans. What do you make of that shift, and what do you think are the factors contributing to that shift?
A big change we saw in our survey this year, as you point out, in the past several years we've seen at least 3 and 4, if not 4 and 5 organizations planning on making a change to their sales compensation plan either this year or next year. And this year we saw a stabilization. We saw, as you say, roughly 1 of 2 organizations actually made a change to their sales compensation plan this year. I think the reason behind that probably has to do with the turbulent economic environment. Organizations were not as certain that making a change to the sales comp plan was going to, in fact, have an impact on better focusing the sales force, or more precisely aligning sales force behavior with organization strategy. I think what they were more likely to focus on this year was the difficult planning environment, getting the goals right, getting territories set right, establishing quotas appropriately in a very difficult environment where you wanted to strike the right balance between achievable targets and realistic targets. You wanted goals that were achievable and realistic, but at the same time were appropriately rigorous to achieve the organization's best case goals.
So let's talk about sales job design now. The survey covers 6 different job types. Could you address those different job types and tell us what we've learned about the evolution of sales job design?
We've investigated 6 roles here over the last several years that we've been doing this survey. The first role is the hybrid sales role that combines responsibility for both new business and existing accounts. We also look at the 2 specialized sales roles, the new business role and the existing accounts role. We also look at telesales, inbound and outbound, and finally we look at the first line sales manager role. One trend we have seen is that the hybrid role seems to be outpacing the other roles in terms of its predominance in utilization by firms. Roughly 8 in 10 firms use a hybrid sales role in their organization. Most of the other roles individually account for no more than about half of the respondents. And we've actually seen a decline, I think, in the specialized sales roles over the last 4 or 5 years, and an increase at the same time of the utilization of the hybrid role. So it could mean that the so-called hunter-farmer model is seeing less utilization by organizations over time. I think it's a bit too soon to make that call, but I think that's the trend that we're seeing in the survey.
So with the evolution of the sales job design, are we seeing a similar evolution when it comes to pay mix, or maybe even with the added pressure of the economy over the last couple of years?
I don't think we can say that. It's a good question in the sense that you would expect a more aggressive pay mix for the new account sales role. You know, those people that are charged with finding new business in the so-called hunter role do have a more aggressive pay mix, certainly. It's about a 60-40 pay mix overall as reported by our survey, where 60% of a salesperson's salary is in base and 40% is at risk based on they're making their plan, their numbers. But it compares reasonably closely to the hybrid role and the existing accounts role, which were in between the 60-40 and 70-30 role. In fact, for all but the inbound telesales role, we saw average pay mixes between 60-40 and 70-30 overall. The most aggressive, like I mentioned, was the new business role, but it's not that much significantly greater than the others, I think, to be especially noteworthy.
I'd like to thank you, Jim, for joining us today and sharing some findings as well as your insights from the recent sales compensation survey. More information as well as the full report is available on the World at Work website. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Research in Brief. For WorkSpan TV, I'm Allison Avalos.